Alright, continuing from the previous lesson, we'll now make a few more minor adjustments to the UV layout of this character before moving on with the process of transferring some of the normal and color information from this high-res model down to our low-res. Alright, so opening this model back up, I'm going to select the chest and Alt-7 to open up my text editor once again. One thing that I do want to show you before we wrap up with the process of working with UVs in XSI is how we can actually heal UVs. So the Heal UVs tool can actually be found right here. It's this little plus icon. So the process of healing UVs is actually a pretty straightforward one. Whenever you tag any points here in the text editor, the corresponding edges will also light up. So for example, as I start to tag some of these points, you can see that these points become highlighted along this green edge. But there's also another area that also becomes highlighted. What that is XSI is telling you that in 3D space, those two actually touch. So if I select my actual model here, and if I could get framed in on that, it's kind of tough to do. Actually, it might be almost impossible to do. There we go. So what that's showing is along this green edge, these 2 points, or these 2 edges actually meet up and touch right here in 3D space. So that's showing that there is actually a connection right there. So what we can do is come in and tag some of these points all along this green edge. What I'll do is tag the corresponding edges along this other side. And if we actually wanted these to become one solid, continuous UV island, all we would need to do is take these two with these highlights selected and then heal those together. Actually, it looks like I probably need to deselect a couple of things here. There we go. Let's just do that. Let's just heal those. There we go. And what I should be able to do is now heal these two together. So sometimes it's kind of a multi-step process, but all in all it usually goes really quickly. Turn that grid off. Let's heal these points together. And there we go. So now you can see exactly how that process begins to take shape. So I'll come in and tweak some of these points around. Now what you might need to do after this heal is you may actually need to come back and tag some of these points to relieve some of the stretching that might happen as a result of this healing. You can see that it actually stretched some of these UVs pretty far in order to make that connection. So what I can always do is come in, tag some of these points, and slowly begin bringing these inward with my move tool. There we go. Now I can just come in and deselect these edges, or these points. Again, switch back to my move tool, and begin pulling these kind of inward. So there we go. And you can see XSI is actually warning me that we do have one UV it looks like got left behind. So no problem, I can just take that. And it looks like those two were actually healed together at one point, so I can just heal those just like that. So there we go. Now we have a couple of UVs that have been moved together and now sewn back into one continuous UV island. So if I turn on my island selection and grab this, you can now see it now grabs that entire island. And now with this new island, I can go ahead and completely scale these in and out. I can move this around or do pretty much anything I need. So there we go. Now, once you have all of these UVs assigned, you'll start to notice all of these different texture supports start to kind of pile up in your scene. If you want to be able to get rid of those, you cannot just select those and simply delete those. If you delete these, that will actually remove the UVs themselves from your object. What you need to do instead is select the object, and then down toward the bottom underneath Edit, you should see the option to be able to freeze your selected operator stack. So if you freeze that, that will now bake these UVs onto your object and remove those texture supports. So there we go. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and open up a file that's already got all these different UVs laid out on it. So we'll call this lesson 4 end. Go ahead and open that up. So this is the exact same model. It just has the UVs actually laid out and placed in a little cleaner fashion. Alright, now once again, if you want to learn a little bit more about UVs in a much more in-depth and detailed manner, Digital Tutors actually does have an entire training kit dedicated solely to moving, manipulating, creating UVs in XSI. So be sure to check that out if you have any questions about UVs and how they work. Right, so now that these UVs have been created and this object has been UV laid out, remember we only need to UV lay out the low-res object. So once we do this, what we need to do now is begin the process of taking all these different meshes and actually merging these down into one solid continuous mesh. So in XSI, that's actually very simple. To actually make this work inside the game engine, we don't necessarily have to have this merged down into one mesh as far as one continuous mesh to where each vertex joins to each other vertex. What we could do simply is just take this entire mesh, go to Create, Polymesh, and down to Merge. Alright, that will bring up this Merge property page. And what I can usually do now is come in and take this tolerance just all the way down to 0. So that way it really doesn't actually physically merge anything together. Right, because you'll see as I increase this tolerance, there are actually vertices and points that are trying to be merged together within XSI. We really don't want that because that's going to mess up our mesh. So what I want to do is take the tolerance all the way down to 0. Let's merge all the UVs, merge any envelopes, and then just delete the original shape that these were built from. So now what we have is one mesh that's lumped together into one node, although not all of these different vertices are actually welded together, as you can see, but that's perfectly fine. This is exactly what we need. So what we may need to do is take this object and reassign it to this low-res layer. So just select your object, right-click on this, and move selected objects to Layer. Now I can turn the visibility off on that. Let's do the same on this high-res character. We'll select pretty much all the geometry. With all that geometry selected, go to Polymesh and Merge. Once again, take the tolerance all the way down to 0, so that way it doesn't actually merge anything together. It just lumps these together into one mesh. Once again, you may want to merge any materials, and you do want to make sure that you delete the input. Otherwise, you'll have two sets of meshes. So there we are. Now we have one mesh for the high res and one mesh for the low res. And the low res mesh should now have all of the UVs nicely laid out. Right, so I've gone ahead and just laid out all these different UVs for this low res character. So that way, whenever we start to generate the normal maps and the color maps and things like that, we'll have a nice clean layout that we can take back into something like Photoshop for any kind of texture editing. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and stop the lesson at this point, and in the next lesson, we'll pick up right where we left off as far as being able to transfer some of this high resolution detail from this high resolution mesh back onto our low resolution game character.